so Sylvie Grote here. I'm the faculty member here in the Division of Kinesiology and Athletics. We're trying to add a department that will be more representative of yoga and integrative wellness, and that might be the future here. Here with my colleague Sam Gould, and because we're in such a small class, you guys are welcome to just address us by our first names, Sylvie and Sam.
Yeah.
And I'm thrilled to be here. I've been teaching here at Cypress for, gosh, almost a decade, I guess, time flies. And I've been in other institutions before, and I think my latest my latest training is in yoga therapy. So we have both done our 200 certifications, 500 certifications, and now we're into a program that's going to allow us to deliver yoga therapy. So just to kind of inspire you on your journey, you're on that first step of the 200 level, and there's other levels to do and enhance your knowledge. And we're always here to guide you and point you in the right direction. So nice to meet you all.
Sylvie, how long have you been practicing yoga for?
Oh, I've been practicing probably about 16 or 17 years.
Longer than me, I think.
A little longer, yeah, something, I don't know, it's just so long. 14, maybe 14, something like that.
Yeah, thanks, Sylvie. So my name is Sam, as Sylvie mentioned. I've had Crystal, you've been in my class before. Some of the others that are not present with us right now viewing the recording, I think, have been in a couple of my classes. So it's nice to have some type of interaction that's not strictly asynchronous. So I'm happy to get to know a little bit more about each of you throughout the semester and how specifically this class can enrich your yoga practice, not necessarily in the way in which you might utilize this for teaching specifically, but to deepen the practice that you may have had for some years now. Because really, and I think we're in agreement about this, is that sometimes just a 200-hour is a great way to deepen the practice that you've started. Obviously, it gives you the certification to be able to teach if that's something that you desire, but it's a great way to both learn more about what yoga is and develop a much more robust self-practice. So that's partially the goal of this course. And hopefully Sylvia and I can assist you with that. Sylvia, as she mentioned, has been practicing for a long time. I've been practicing for probably like 12, 13 years. So in many respects, that's not a very long time to be practicing. And in other ways, it is a long time to be practicing. But our goal is to try to assist you, most importantly, with developing, as I said, a much more robust self-practice, because that's going to be your foundation for which you teach from, if you choose to teach in the future. So I'll say that one more time because I really value this and think it's very important. The self-practice that you develop is the foundation for which you can start to teach and articulate some of that information. If the information you've learned isn't really a part of your self-practice, in my opinion, maybe Sylvia's a little bit different, but it's harder to integrate that information into what you'll be teaching. So that's something to keep in mind as we go forward throughout the semester. So a couple of logistical things before we get started. Sylvia mentioned we're going to meet every second Wednesday. I mentioned this in the announcement yesterday, but if it's possible, I would recommend being here in person, but we have the online option, which a few of you are on, and then if you're not able to make it, obviously you view the recording. So a couple of you had difficulties with some of the parameters of the assignment related to this in-person class, the Zoom or asynchronous, and how it relates to the journal reflection. So everybody will have to make a journal reflection based off of what we do here in person. And depending on your viewing will mean you'll have to do the assignment a little bit differently. So write a little bit less or write a little bit more, depending on if you're Zoom or asynchronous or if you're in person. You want to add anything to that?
No, I think we're just
Ready
about
to
to
go.
get started. So
Okay.
again, to recap, we're gonna do a practice about 35-40 minutes. And then we're gonna move into theory. We're gonna end at, we're gonna try to wrap up the class just a few minutes before 1 o'clock, just to leave some room for questions, but you can obviously ask questions without the theory part altogether. And if there are any questions right now, please just unmute yourself and let us know.
Or you could do the virtual hand. I think we can see the virtual hand from here, but I recommend just unmuting.
We good? Okay, all right, let's get started.
Okay, so we're gonna get started in a seated Sukhasana position. So as you can see, we have blankets, so we're gonna be sitting up onto something. I recommend taking the cross at the center of the shin bones. And then resting the palms, two options, either one palm resting on the other, generally more dominant resting in the less dominant hand, or just placing the palms on the thighs or the knees, depending on how much room you have. And then just adjusting the pelvis a little bit. So maybe leaning a little bit forward. So you're more to the front of the sit bones, just so that the pelvis isn't tucking underneath of you and the spine is nice and upright. And maybe taking a few moments just to allow the eyes to stay open until you become accustomed with the seat, with the surroundings, a sense of familiarity. And when you become a little bit more comfortable, maybe you start to close the eyes and draw the attention inward. And with the eyes closed, just start by noticing how you're feeling in the physical body. How the seat feels. Is it comfortable, uncomfortable, whatever it might be? Notice the positioning of the spine relative to the pelvis. And notice the positioning of the spine as it relates to the breath, the inhale and the exhale. And notice where relative to the spine you're breathing. Notice if the breath is predominantly located around the abdomen or potentially somewhere around the chest. And just for the time being, don't try to change the direction of the breath. Just notice what the natural tendency is. And as you get a sense of what the natural tendency is of both the spine and the breath, with a sense of direction now, notice where you're located on the sit bones, so the pelvis, bottom of the pelvis. And see if you can move the weight a little bit more to the front edges of the sit bones. That's going to feel like you're leaning a little forward, but not going too far where the weight is transferred all the way out in front of you. With the positioning of the pelvis and sit bones, then start to notice where the rib cage is relative to the pelvis. If it's forward or if it's slightly back. And then start to move the attention from the rib cage up to the neck and to the skull, the back of the skull in particular. And notice where the back of the skull is relative to the back of the rib cage. And notice if there's a sense of integrity related to the positioning of the rib cage to the positioning of the skull. Notice if the skull is moving either forward or back in space. And see if you can find a positioning of the rib cage and the skull where they're in some sense sitting over top of the pelvis. So that the rib cage is over top of the pelvis, the skull over top of the rib cage. As if you were stacking 3 orbs on top of one another. And with the stacking of the 3 orbs, start to imagine that you could draw a line from the crown of the head down between the orbs all the way towards the pelvic floor. And with that line moving between and throughout each orb, imagine that the breath was moving up and down that line. From the base of the pelvis, the pelvic floor, up through the rib cage, up through the skull to the crown of the head. And then as you exhale, imagine that you are moving back down through the rib cage to the pelvis again. The inhale drawing you up the line, and the exhale drawing you down the line. Just notice with that visual if that changes the composition of both the physical body, the breath, and how you're able to feel into the body in this particular seat. And take one more full cycle of breath, inhale and exhale. At the bottom of the next exhale, just very gently open the eyes. And just notice if the gaze is slightly different once you've opened the eyes with that sense of reestablishing where the physical body is in space. Good. Okay, from here, we're gonna come to standing Tadasana. So as you can see, Sylvie has, hopefully you can see Sylvie's feet. Sylvie has her feet a little bit apart from one another. And the heels are going to be a little bit more behind the second toe. That's gonna be a little bit different for everybody. But relatively speaking, the inner arch will be parallel to one another. And then taking the feet, so either a little apart or inner hip distance. And then just standing tall, and again, just like we did in the seat, start with the eyes open for a moment and just notice how it feels with the visual in a standing upright position. And then once there's a sense of familiarity with the standing position, if it's appropriate, start to close the eyes. Start to draw the attention inward, just like we did with the seat. So notice what immediately starts to happen with the eyes and the gaze drawing inward. Maybe the first thing to shift is balance. But immediately start to draw the attention, the awareness down into the feet. Notice what it feels like with the soles of the feet on the floor, on the mat. What aspect of the soles of the feet can you feel on the mat? Outer foot, inner foot, front of the foot, back of the foot, wherever it might be. And with the sense of direction, start to ground the big toe mounds down through the foot, through the mat, and simultaneously start to lift the inner arch away from the floor. For some of us, that's going to feel like we're turning the feet out, but keep grounding the big toe mounds down. With that groundedness of the feet, let the inner arches lift, and then continue that lifted quality up through the legs, all the way to the pelvic floor, the pelvis, just like when we're seated in space. So there's a lifted quality all the way up through the inseam of the leg to the pelvis. Start to draw the attention specifically to the back of the pelvis. Notice what it feels like without the support of the blanket, the floor. Is there a tendency for the pelvis to move back in space or forward in space? Whatever that tendency is, start to move the sacrum, the back of the pelvis, in and slightly down towards the heels. But notice with that action if there's a tendency to tuck the pelvis under. If that's the case, also allow the upper inner thigh bones to move towards the wall behind you. As the sacrum moves in and down, then continue the energy, the awareness up to the back of the rib cage, and think of moving the rib cage back over top of the pelvis, just like with the seat. Let the back of the rib cage widen and lift. As the back of the rib cage widens and lifts, continue the awareness all the way up the back of the spine, the back of the neck, to the back of the skull. And notice the position of the skull, just like we did in the seat. Notice if the tendency of the skull is to move either forward or back in space. And just like the back of the rib cage, imagine the back of the skull is opening and widening into space. So as you stack the body, feet, pelvis, rib cage, skull, imagine that the skull was sitting over top of the rib cage over top of the pelvis, and pelvis over top of the feet. So 4 orbs stacking over top of one another. And again, just like the seat, imagine there was a line moving through each of those orbs straight through the body. From the inseam of the feet, up through the inner leg, up through the pelvis, up through the rib cage, the skull. And as you exhale, all the way back down again. Good. Take a deep inhale. And as you exhale, open the eyes and gaze forward and notice if anything has shifted in the positioning of the body. Good. Inhale, lift the arms to the ceiling. So Urdhva Hastasana. Good. If you need the visual aid, you can look at Sylvie. So notice the positioning of Sylvie's arms. They're not behind her head, and they're not too far out in front. They're more towards the front of the face, the front of the ear. Now notice with the lift of the arms, if anything has changed in that line moving down the body through each of the orbs, skull, ribcage, pelvis, feet. And with the lift of the arms, see if you can again widen the back of the skull, widen the back of the ribcage, widen the back of the pelvis through the movement of the sacrum in and down. And then let the soles of the feet widen, the inner arches widen in space. Good. Now take an inhale, reach the arms to the ceiling. And without changing anything, exhale, take the arms down by the side waists. So we're going to try to maintain that line just by lifting and lowering the arms. Inhale, the arms go out and up. And exhale, the arms lower to the sideways. Good. So we're going to do it a few times and trying to synchronize the breath with the movement. So the inhale, the arms lift. Still maintaining that integrity between the orbs, and exhale the arms down. If it's appropriate, just breathing through the nostrils. Inhale, the arms lift. Good. Notice when you lift the arms, if there's still that connection to the orb of the soles of the feet. Good. And then one more time. Inhale, the arms lift. And exhale, the arms lower. Good. Now we're going to fold all the way forward on the next round. So inhale the arms, Urdhva Hastasana. And exhale, folding forward this time, Uttanasana. So using the bricks, if you have them, you can take a little look at Sylvie and how she's placed the bricks in space. So notice the bricks are a little bit more towards the front portion of the feet, right where the big toe mound is. And then just take a little look at the feet and notice if anything has shifted now that you have the visual. Notice if the feet are either turning inward or outward in space. Again, the center of the heel directly behind the second toe and the inner arches parallel. That's going to be a little bit different for everybody, but it's a relative place to be. Good. Now, just like we did in the standing position, ground down through the big toe mound like you're going to put a hole in the mat and lift the inner arch away from the floor. The liftedness, do it so much so that it feels like you might fall over. So that the pelvis is going to almost fall forward because you're lifting so much. There's so much activity. Good. Now keep a little micro bend into the knees and let the back of the spine release in space. But there's still that activity through the feet and that lifted sensation upward through the inner arch, inner leg. Good. Now keeping that, and inhale, come halfway up onto the fingertips. So Adho Uttanasana, halfway up. Good. And then notice, if you need to, you can look at Sylvie. Notice where the pelvis is in space. If the pelvis feels like it's moving behind you or too far out in front of you, relatively speaking, see if you can locate the pelvis right over the top of the heel or the back of the heel. And continue that grounded sensation through the big toe mound. Lift the inner arch up away from the floor, that lifted quality up through the leg. And continue that lifted quality up through the spine towards the wall out in front of you. So it's going to feel like the front of the spine, the chest, the sternum is lengthening through the upper arms. Good. So two directions, the legs moving upward, the spine moving directly outward. And notice, just with the halfway up position, if you can still feel that sense of connection through all four of the orbs: feet, pelvis, rib cage, skull. Take one more deep breath. And then exhale, fold in half. Let the whole spine release again. Let the skull release. We'll kind of come all the way to standing. Inhale, arms out and up, forward, Bahastasana. So arms to the ceiling again. And then exhale where we started, standing Tadasana. We're going to try this a few times just with the breath. Inhale, arms lift. Exhale, fold forward. Inhale, come halfway, lengthen the front of the chest forward. Exhale, fold forward. Good. Inhale, all the way up to standing, out and up with the arms, Urdhva Hastasana. Exhale, standing tall Tadasana. One more time like that. Inhale, arms lift out and up. Exhale, folding forward. And as you move, notice if that connection with the feet is still there. Inhale, halfway. Exhale, fold. Good. Inhale, rise to stand, out and up with the arms. And then this time, keep the lift of the arms and bend the knees. Exhale, Utkatasana chair. Good. So notice, now that we've maybe created a slightly more complex composition of the body, that is to say, we've bent the knees now, and we're still reaching the arms. Can you still feel into that Tadasana line? So there's that sense of the big toe mound still grounding, the inner arch still lifting up through the legs, even though we're bending the knees. The sacrum is still moving in and down. The spine is still lengthening outward in space. But if you were to stand, the crown of the head is still sitting over top of the rib cage over top of the pelvis. Good. Now, if you find the knees moving out in front of you, push the kneecaps back and then move the sacrum a little bit more in and down. Good. Sternum's reaching towards the fingertips. Take a deep breath. And then exhale, fold forward, Uttanasana, forward fold. Inhale, halfway, so again, lengthening the chest forward. And then exhale, step the left foot back. Lower the knee and inhale to a low lunge, arms to the ceiling. Good, so if it's appropriate, keep the back toes tucked and ground the back big toe mound down. Good, so again, just like the Utkatasana, start to notice where the knee of the front leg is relative to the heel of the foot. So push the kneecap back, so it's right over top of the front portion of the heel. And then notice again that Tadasana line. So as you ground down through the right big toe mound, lift the inner arch up and away from the floor. Good, and then notice the positioning of the pelvis, even though now two things are taking place differently within each leg. front leg forward, one leg back, and see if you can create some kind of line from pelvis up through the rib cage and up through the skull. Maybe you start to move the rib cage back over top of the pelvis. And again, there's that sense of widening the back ribs, widening the back of the skull, and lengthening upward through the arms. Take a deep, full breath. And then exhale, the palms come down, press, and step to downward facing dog, Adho Mukha Svanasana. Very good. And even in the downward facing, so starting to imagine and cultivate a relationship to that Tadasana line. So maybe a little bend into the knees. Again, just assessing the placement of the feet, heel behind the second toe. Inner arches are lifting up the inseam of the leg. There's that sense of the sacrum moving this time in and towards the back wall. And think of the back of the rib cage again widening and the back of the skull widening in space. Good. And as you widen the back of the rib cage skull, let the tops of the thigh bones move away from the palms. So as you press down through the palms, tops of the thighs are moving towards the back wall. Take a deep, full breath. Either take a break like Sylvia's and come down. And then when you're ready, make your way all the way to the front of the mat, standing, folding forward, Uttanasana. Inhale halfway. Exhale, fold forward. Inhale, rise to center, out and up with the arms again. And then exhale, bend the knees again, Utkatasana chair. So just one breath this time. Inhale, filling up the back of the ribs. Exhale, folding forward, slow and control. Good. Inhale, come halfway up. And then exhale, this time the right leg is going to step, the knee is going to come down, and the arms lift. Inhale, low lunge. Good. So the same thing, but on the other side now. So noticing that positioning of the Tadasana line. Notice the tendency of the spine relative to the pelvis. Stacking the ribcage over top of the pelvis, stacking the skull over top of the ribcage. Good, now grounding down through that left big toe mount. Again, just like you're still standing tall. Inner arch is going to lift. Sacrum goes in and down, and then keep reaching upward towards the ceiling. Very, very good. Take a full deep inhale, everybody. And keep propelling downward through the feet and upward through the arms. One more deep full breath. Exhale, palms to the floor, and step to that downward facing position again. All the way back. Good, just one breath this time. Take an inhale. And exhale, step forward and fold forward to the front of the mat. Good, inhale, come halfway up. Exhale, fold forward. So we're going to do the whole thing, but just on the breath this time. Inhale, arms to the ceiling. Exhale, bend the knees, Utkatasana chair. Inhale. Exhale, fold forward, slow and control. Good. Inhale, halfway. Exhale, step the left foot back, lower the knee gently. Inhale, the arms to the ceiling. Exhale, palms come down, press to downward facing. Very good. Full inhale. Exhale, step forward and fold forward front of the mat. Good. Inhale, halfway. Exhale, fold forward. Inhale, rise to stand out and up with the arms. Again, exhale, bend the knees, Utkatasana chair. Good. Full Exhale, fold forward. Inhale, halfway. Exhale, right foot steps back, gently lowering the knee. Inhale, arms to the ceiling. Exhale, palms come down, press. Inhale, downward facing all the way back. Very good. When you're ready, exhale, look forward, step forward, fold forward, front to the mat. Uttanasana. Inhale, halfway up. Exhale, folding forward. Inhale, rise to stand out and up with the arms. Exhale, bend the knees, Utkatasana chair. Good. Full deep inhale. Exhale, fold forward, slow and control. Inhale, halfway up. And then this time, exhale, step the left foot back. Step the left foot an inch to the left, put the back heel down, and inhale to first warrior, Virabhadrasana 1. So you can see with Sugi's feet a little bit that there's a little bit of width to match the positioning of the pelvis. So there's a little bit of room for that back heel to ground down. Now, everybody start to bend the front knee, so the knee is just over top of the heel, just like the low lunge. And as you ground the back heel down, can you start to feel again that Tadasana line? Even though now we've turned the back heel. So the inner arch of the back foot's going to lift up the inseam of the leg, but also the inseam of the arch is going to lift up the front leg as well. So there's that lifted quality through the feet that we attempted to cultivate in the Tadasana. Now, similarly, allow the sacrum to move in and down without tucking the pelvis, and then move the back of the rib cage over top of the pelvis and widen the back ribs again. Attention comes up to the back of the skull, widen the back of the skull, and then let the arms lengthen outward and upward to the ceiling. So even though the legs are doing two different things, there's still that sense of the Tadasana. Take a deep breath, exhale, palms to the floor, and all the way down, downward facing press. Good. Take a full deep breath. Exhale, step forward and fold forward front to the mat. Good. Inhale, halfway. Exhale, fold forward. Inhale, rise to stand. Exhale, bend the knees, Utkatasana chair. Take a full deep breath. Exhale, folding forward. Inhale, halfway. Exhale, right foot's going to step back again. Step the foot an inch to the right. Back heel turns down, and then inhale the arms to the ceiling for the first warrior, Virabhadrasana 1. And again, a little bit of width between the feet, enough room for the pelvis. Ground the back heel firmly through the floor. And then start to move the rib cage again back over top of the rib of the pelvis, and the skull back over top of the rib cage. Good. Widening the back ribs, widening and opening the back of the skull, and maybe you bend into the front knee if that's appropriate. Good. And then there's that reach upward through the outer arm. Very good, everybody. Take a full deep inhale. And exhale, take the palms down to the floor. Press, inhale, plank. And then downward facing. Good. And then just lower the knees and take a little break from them. Maybe you take child's pose, maybe you just sit back onto the heels. Notice the quality of the breath. And come back upright. Good. So obviously we've been playing with this idea of the Tadasana line. So just to further that a little bit, we're going to experiment what it feels like in the plank position.
No, it's okay. I'm getting a little warm. So
Yeah,
I'm
good.
taking my clothes off.
Hopefully everybody's okay. Okay, so just like we did in the Tadasana. So now, to start on all fours. So notice what it feels like with the knees on the floor before we even lift the knee. So again, we're trying to, in some sense, line up here three components of the body: the pelvis, the rib cage, and the skull. Again, the three orbs, and trying to create a relationship between each of those orbs. So notice immediately the tilt of the pelvis. Notice if the pelvis is either tilting underneath of you, or if the low spine is collapsing and the pelvis is releasing behind you. So notice first the tilt. See if you can find a neutral positioning of the pelvis. Additionally, now notice where the rib cage is relative to the pelvis. And just like we were talking about in the lunges in the first warrior, see if you can widen the back ribs and push up away from the floor. Like the front of the spine is lifting towards the back of the spine. And then moving the attention further up, start to widen the back of the skull and lift the back of the skull away from the floor so it's lining up with the back of the spine, rib cage, pelvis. Now press through the index knuckle and then lift one leg back, toes grounding down, just one leg at a time. Good. Notice with one leg, if anything has shifted in the body. Pelvis is rotated, low spine is lowered, whatever it might be, and see if you can cultivate that Tadasana line again, a line moving from the crown of the head, through the rib cage, through the pelvis, and then when you're ready, if it's appropriate, lift the other leg, second leg. Good, so both knees are lifted in space. Very, and notice immediately if something in the line has collapsed in space. So as you press through the palms, additionally, let the thigh bones lift away from the floor. Let the back of the rib cage widen. Let the back of the skull widen. Press through the center of the heel behind you and let the chest reach towards the front wall. Take a deep breath and then rest. Good. Now come to lying on your back. Good, so the whole body extending out across the mat. Arms can be just on the belly, and then when you're ready, extend the legs. Good, so just like when we were standing at the beginning, flex at the ankle, and take the feet inner hip distance apart, just like you're still standing on the floor. Good, and now notice what it feels like with the back of the body on the mat. From the heel all the way to the back of the pelvis, the back of the rib cage, to the back of the skull. Good. And now reach the arms down by the side waists. Good. And now imagine again like you're standing, you're pressing the big toe bones through the imaginary floor. The inner arch is lifting all the way up the inseam of the leg to the pelvis, widening the back of the pelvis on the floor. Move the sacrum down across the floor towards the heels. Widen the back of the rib cage across the mat. And then think of widening the back of the skull so it's opening into the mat, and then lift the arms to the ceiling. Good. Palms are facing one another, and then reach to the back wall. Good. And then if it's appropriate, just let the arms lift a little bit away from the floor. And then see if you can, again, come back to all of those actions, cultivating that line through the inner arch, all the way towards the pelvic floor, sacrum, widen the back of the rib cage across the floor, and then widen the back of the skull. Good, like this one line, inseam of the feet, all the way up through the body towards the crown of the head. Take one more inhale, and then arms come all the way back upright, and then relax. So just take a few moments here with the eyes closed, relax the jaw. Now, without any of the activity, even with the body relaxing into the mat, notice if there's any energetic remnants of that Tadasana line. All the way from the soles of the feet, the inseam of the feet, up through the inseam of the leg, through the spine, all the way up through the skull to the crown of the head. And then as you still breathe this time, just naturally, imagine that each of the orbs from the feet, pelvis, rib cage to skull were widening with the inhale and relaxing with the exhale. Soles of the feet widening as you inhale, relaxing as you exhale. Pelvis is widening as you inhale, relaxing, releasing as you exhale. Rib cage widens, relaxes. The base of the skull widens and relaxes. Take one more full cycle of inhale and exhale. And when you're ready, just gently open the eyes, like we did in the seated position, the standing position, and just notice how you find the body in space again. Gently bend the knees, feet to the floor. And then slowly roll into a side and make your way up into a seat. And just take a few moments to gather yourself. You need to grab some water, whatever it might be. Look, if you need a notebook or anything, you're okay.
Repeat any questions that Stephen? Yeah.
Crystal, Celeste, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Do you have any immediate questions from what we just did?
No, that was great. I noticed that a lot of subtle movements made a big difference in how my body felt. So that was really nice. Thank you.
Okay.
Did you do the grass okay though?
Can you hear us okay?
Yes.
Could you hear us during the practice or me speaking?
Yes, I could hear. I got disconnected just for a quick minute, but I was able to get back on.
Okay, good, very good. Okay, so do you have any questions?
I was able to hear everything.
Everything was good? It's super loud now.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so there's an obvious theme. We were experimenting a little bit with what Tadasana feels like in the body. So everything that we did was with this idea of trying to find and cultivate a relationship to center. And center can mean a few different things. But there is somewhat of a clear outline for what it represents for us with a yoga practice. Obviously, when we're doing some type of asana physical practice, there's a clear relationship to center as it correlates to the spine. So that's something that with our other classes we've taken, and in this class, we'll constantly come back to and reflect on. So that's what we attempted to cultivate with what we did today. Now, we'll come back to that a little bit, in a little bit, with the remaining time that we have. And hopefully there'll be some further questions as to what exactly that is. What exactly is Tadasana? Because as you may remember and know from our previous class, especially the philosophy class, and also with the physical body class, a lot of the postures that we utilize are very new relative to the historical, let's say, genealogy of the practice. The only traditional type of posture that is referenced within the majority of the text that we refer to is this idea of a seat, which is predominantly related to lotus or just with a general cross-legged seat. So what we're going to do briefly is backtrack in terms of locating why doing this type of practice, why would we do that in the first place, and what might be its benefits. And benefits is there's a multiplicity in terms of what we might relate to as, or refer to as benefits. There's the obvious, which are health benefits, but then there's something a lot wider in terms of this being, for lack of a better term, a spiritual practice. And that's going to mean a little bit different for everybody, but specifically with the primary text that we refer to, which is the Yoga Sutras, there's a very clear outline in terms of what that means. So we're going to backtrack real quickly. We're going to go over where this comes from in terms of its overarching cosmology and how this filters down into what it represents in terms of a physical practice that we can do every single day. So that's going to be our outline for the next 20 minutes. Okay, super duper good. Okay, so I'm pretty sure Crystal and Celeste, I cannot see any of you, but do you have a copy of the sutras?
I do not.
Okay, that's okay, because I'm going to reference some page numbers, and then I'll also write this and post this to the class when the recording comes up. Okay? Sound like a good idea? And if you want to, put yourself on the camera, that would be great, so I can see somebody and not speak into a box.
That's your battery. I'm just gonna look at my battery, just so.
Mine, yeah.
So we have enough battery.
I have a little bit.
I guess
battery.
it took a
Okay.
lot of our batteries out. Mine is almost out.
How much you got?
Very little. So that was not a good planning on our end. We apologize. So if that goes out, you are not really connected to the owl. So this might get cut off earlier. We apologize. This is our first time I just didn't bring my,
If we get cut off,
yeah,
I will post a little recording of what I'm about to go over.
okay,
If
okay.
we get cut off early, okay?
But we have about 20 minutes. We will end, on time. So if it does get cut off, you'll get the rest on the recording.
Okay. So, does anybody recall from the philosophy class? I think, Crystal, have you taken that class with me before?
No, this is my first class.
Oh, first class, oh, this is great. What a great day. What a great day. Okay, so the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali is a methodology of practice. So it's not a book that's predominantly, let's say, a philosophical text. It's an outline for reaching a particular state of mind, which is referred to as samadhi. Does that make sense to everybody? That the idea of samadhi may not make any sense, but what we are suggesting is that it's a practical methodology that's based off of an already constituted philosophical outline that comes from the Samkhya tradition. Okay? So the Samkhya philosophy predominantly is, so we might think of it in two specific components. So on the one hand, we will know that there is this quality, I'm going to refer to it as a quality, rather than something like an essence or something like that. But a quality of Purusha is one of the constituents that is what is sometimes referred to as pure consciousness.
It's okay.
Yeah. It's an introduction. Sometimes is referred to as pure consciousness, but in essence, the quality that we're referring to cannot necessarily be constituted within some type of linguistical apparatus. We're referring to it as some type of objective reality. It's the thing that permeates all existence, Purusha. So the other component that we will refer to in this cosmology is what we might refer to as Prakriti. Prakriti is this idea of, it's the Purusha that's in an evolutionary perspective is moving into objective form or reality. So it's the objectification of this essence that's permeating the continual evolution of that objective matter. So we have two specific things. Purusha, sometimes referred to as pure consciousness. Prakriti, which is everything that is in some sense material. Everything that is evolving and creating new, let's say, components of the reality of which we experience. Okay, there's any brief questions about that? Two components, Purusha and Prakriti. One, an essence that permeates all objective reality that we experience, which we refer to as Prakriti. So in some ways, we might refer to this as a dualistic metaphysics. Two components, but this would be misleading in some ways because they are a part of the same, let's say, objective reality that we're experiencing. The only difference is that the Purusha, the pure essence quality consciousness, is that which makes way for objective reality, everything that we experience in life. So in some ways, they're the same thing. Okay? So let's just go with me. Looks like you're thinking a lot. That's good. Okay. So what comes out of this, in some ways, think of it in a dualistic sense, Purusha and Prakriti, is the three gunas, the three components of everything that derives from Prakriti, material reality. So we have three, okay? The three gunas, so we have the sattvic quality, okay? We have the rajasic quality, and we have the tamasic quality, okay? So rajas refers to this idea of an energetic, more robust quality. And on the other hand, the tamasic quality is a much more lethargic and passive quality. So one that's extremely active, rajasic, one which is far more passive, which is the tamasic quality. Now, the sattvic quality, for the sake of our conversation today, we might think of it as a quality that's in some way that's referred to as this idea of tranquility, but it is a balancing quality between this predominance of rajasic, over energy, fire, and tamasic, this idea of a passive quality. So three components that are manifest in all forms of Prakriti. So I'll say that one more time. Three components, the gunas, that are inert, that are immanent, I should say, of all Prakriti which we experience in life. So everything that's material has these three components, okay? Everything that's material has these three components: rajasic, sattvic, and tamasic, okay?
And I'm putting this into the chat as well for the spell. I think I'm okay with them. Yeah.
Okay, so we have the Purusha, pure consciousness. In some ways, it's a vital force that permeates everything of Prakriti, material reality. Everything in material reality has three qualities: tamasic, rajasic, sattvic, okay? So that's our overarching metaphysical or cosmological outlook of the Samkhya philosophy. So, keeping that in mind, we now get to this idea of mind. Now, the first stage of this unfolding or evolutionary unfolding of matter is through this idea of the buddhi. Now, the buddhi I'm referring to as the first stage of the individuation process out of this Prakriti state of physical matter that includes tamasic, rajasic, and sattvic qualities. It's the first component or stage of mind. Now, mind in this sense is not how we refer to it in many of the Western traditions, mind sometimes correlating to this type of thinking apparatus, but broadly speaking, there's a similarity. So out of this first stage of the buddhi, the mahat, the first stage of intellect, which is a cosmic intellect, that is to say, it's a cosmic force that's permeating all material, all prakriti, and out of that buddhi comes the ahankara. So this is really the first stage of the individuation process within each form or each individual, okay? So it's really the first stage of the mind self-identifying. The first stage of where an ego forms out of this relationship between these three forms or three qualities of the gunas, okay? And then out of the ahankara, which is the self-ego, we then get all of our predominant senses and qualities that we might relate to the physical body. So we have like the manas, which is the mind, which is closely or more closely related to how we would generally or usually come to this understanding of mind as this thinking apparatus. We have the senses, We have all of the subtle elements that we connect to our environment, through hearing, through seeing, through taste. And then we also have the gross elements, which are also intimately linked to the gunas. So that's the gross elements, meaning space, wind, fire, and earth and water. So out of the gunas, not only do we get the individuation process of mind as it manifests within a specific individual, but we also, on the other hand, get all of the senses that we relate to the physical body, and then all of the elements that the body is literally made out of. Okay, so that's a really quick overlap, or a condensing of where things are deriving from the Purusha and the Prakriti, through the first stage of intellect, the Buddhi, the first stage of mind that's forming, from the Buddhi, the Ahamkara, which is this first stage of self-identification, the ego, and from that state of ego, the manas, the mind, that is evolving out of both this individuation process between the ahamkara, the self-identity ego, and the manas, but also through the gunas as they manifest between the 5 elements, and then also all of the sensory apparatus that we have as we relate to the physical body. Okay, so that's a really good question.
And where can this be found in the sutras, or do we have that in our class?
We already had that up on the first reading.
On the first reading,
Yeah.
so you guys refer to the first reading,
Yeah,
there's the
that's-
diagram, so we're following the diagram from the first reading, okay?
Yeah, and I will also recap this. I will send another announcement out maybe today or tomorrow with maybe just recapping some of this. But okay, when we take this now, here's the question for us, open question for all of us. If we take this into consideration, that there is, let's say, a pure elemental force. In some ways, we might refer to this as a vital force, a cosmic intelligence, Purusha. This cosmic intelligence or vital force permeates, makes way for this idea of the Prakriti. In some sense, in the Samkhya tradition, we might suggest that the Prakriti, in many ways, this evolutionary quality of matter coming into existence, is such that the Purusha can experience itself. Such that the Purusha can experience itself. So in that way, experience itself in the physical form, okay, but also when we start to consider this idea of the vital force permeating physical matter, we have this idea of an evolutionary trajectory, the creation or the cultivation of not only an individual throughout time and space, but we can also make the larger assessment of species evolving throughout time and space, okay? So
Celeste, would you like to, or even Crystal, if you'd like to chat in, I'm attending to the chat. Do you guys have any questions as of right now? Would you like anything to be repeated? I mean, this is the benefit of being here live, is that you get to ask questions and clarify anything that you're hearing.
I guess I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Can Purusha exist without Prakriti, or do they depend on one another?
that's a really good question. That's a really good question. So everything is Purusha in essence. So let's come back to your question. So keep that in mind. Do they depend on one another? Let's come back to that a little bit. So what's the goal of yoga? What's the goal of yoga? Celeste, do you remember that? This is going to be my next point of why we come to this, and how does this relate back to this idea of Tadasana that we experienced and explored today?
Is it the stilling of the mind to achieve?
Duba. Exactly, yeah. You want to read it out? You've got it there. Do you have the second sutra? I can read it. If that's easier. Or if you have it, you go for it. So you're right, so yoga, the goal of yoga, the goal of this entire methodology, remember this, the text itself, which we'll get to, the eight-limb system, is not a philosophical, let's say, treatise. It's a methodology for achieving a particular state. That state is the cessation or the stilling of the activities, permutations of mind, which we might relate to thinking, the operation of thinking, which relates back to, if we remember this evolutionary trajectory of the manas, the mind. So 3 stages from prakriti to buddhi to the ahamkara, the cultivation of the self-ego, to then the cultivation of the mind. We have, hey,
Yoga?
oh, yes, maybe like 10, 15 minutes, yes, thank you so much. So from this evolutionary trajectory, Celeste and Crystal, what we have is this cultivation of a particular, in the yoga tradition, an organ, a particular cultivation, an evolutionary cultivation of an organ, which is thinking. Now, the goal of yoga is to still that process, to, in some sense, to still the evolutionary trajectory of this continual evolution of Prakriti. Because now remember, Purusha is always trying to experience itself in space. This gets back to your question, Celeste, about this dependence, this coupling. So Prakriti is always making way for new forms for which to experience itself within this cosmological outlook, okay? So in that process, we have the ahamkara and the manas, the mind, the thinking apparatus. So within that operation of the thinking, the manas, there comes this, let's say, reflection for Patanjali now. So for Patanjali, he creates this 8-limb system for which the goal is the stilling, the cessation of mind. Why would he do that? Why would he suggest that we have this methodology of stilling the movement of mind? Okay? Why would he suggest that that's a good thing if this is part of the evolutionary trajectory of the Prakriti as Purusha continues to evolve to experience itself? Well, in some sense, it's a retracting from the evolutionary trajectory to move back to reflect upon the origins of which this evolutionary trajectory derives, which is the Purusha. So we're trying to still the mind to this point of a one-pointed focus so that we can experience the Purusha. But at the same time, the Purusha is always the thing that's cultivating the continual unfolding individuation process of the Prakriti itself. So in some ways it's a contradiction, but Patanjali thinks it's a good idea to still the mind so that we can
Yeah. So that in some sense, Celeste, can you hear me? Okay, good. Crystal, okay, good. We have the recording. We're good to go. So in some sense, we are stepping out of that unfolding of the Prakriti so that we can still that evolutionary trajectory of the Prakriti as it moves and unfolds, to look back and reflect back on the, let's say, the kernel of which the Prakriti evolves, which is the Purusha, which also just happens to be the thing that is imminent to everything that is Prakriti, which is everything that's material. So they do depend on each other, but mostly that Prakriti depends on the Purusha, because the Purusha permeates everything that's Prakriti. So our goal with the Yoga Sutras is, from the second sutra, the stilling of the movement of the mind, of everything that distracts or detracts itself from this one-pointed focus of the Purusha. So it's not the erasing of thought, of thinking, of the manas, it's the one-pointedness of the thinking onto something specific so that it can experience the essence of what that thing might be. And for us, it's the reflection on the thing, the Purusha, the vital quality that's in us, that joins us, that unites us, that yokes us to the Purusha. So with that in mind, Patanjali has a specific methodology for how to do that, which is the 8-limb system. Okay, so the 8-limb system moves from the very gross, ethical, to the physical, to the more subtle, the pranayama, all the way to just pure meditation and one-pointed focus. So it's this trajectory from the gross to the subtle, and it's the retracting away from the senses so that we can point our focus specifically on the essence of the vital force, the Purusha, that is immanent to everything that's Prakriti. So first, we come to an understanding of some of the ethical parameters of the practice, the yamas and the niyamas, to the asana, the cultivation of a one-pointed focus within the gross, the physical, to something a little bit more subtle, which is the pranayama, the movement of the subtle energy. And then further, we move to some of the more, let's say, meditative components of the last 4 limbs of the practice until the samadhi. And then there's 5 different stages of the samadhi. We're not concerning ourselves so much with that because that's the retracting of the senses. We, for this class, the contemporary class that we're in, are looking specifically at the asana and the pranayama and how these two things cultivate an understanding of both the physical and the subtle as they relate to one another, relating to the physical body. Sylvia, do you have any questions? Celeste, do you have any questions?
No, that was a great explanation. Thank you so much.
Sorry, we missed that. We had the volume on too low. Could you repeat that?
Oh, I said that was a great explanation. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, and to be mindful of everyone's time, we're going to wrap it up.
We have 12, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so this was, we just covered a lot in a super short time. The last thing I will say about this, if our concern, and this is an open question, is about both the stilling of the mind in terms of a one-pointed focus, so that we're focused literally on one thing. So the thinking apparatus, the manas, is focused on one thing. How does this relate to this idea of Tadasana? How does that relate to the idea of Tadasana and this idea of center, this idea of midline? And also, if we come back, if we take into consideration the Tadasana, remember, what are the 3 constituents of Prakriti? Tamas, Rajas, and Sattva. 3 qualities that permeate all material existence, right? The sattvic quality, which is tranquility, or for us, we're going to relate this to the idea of balance. We might suggest that the Tadasana is related, or this idea of cultivating a sattvic quality between rajasic and tamasic qualities, whereby it's not to say that rajasic or tamasic is good or bad, but it's to say we're trying to balance out a lot of energy, activity, with this idea of passive, subtle, lethargic quality, and how that relates to the sattvic, the balance, and how does that relate to the Tadasana, midline in the body, where the body is in a symmetrical position. Does that make any sense? So in some sense, when we're doing the physical postures, and in this sense, relating it to the Tadasana, we're creating a clear relationship to these constituents of Prakriti, the primordial qualities of Prakriti, Rajas, Tamas, Sattva, and how the sattvic quality can balance out everything that's taking place between and in and around the physical body, which will get us to our next consideration. What's the role of asana and pranayama in this process? Last questions, Celeste or Crystal?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay. So this arrives at our place of how do we contextualize all this, which will be for next week and for our next class. Okay. Okay, so that's all the time that we have for today. Is there no other questions? Last comments? Okay, so I will send an announcement out a little bit later about some of what we've covered today and how that relates to the goal of this class and the goal of the practice. Okay? All right, take care, everybody. Namaste. And I'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Take care.